What really killed Bruce Lee? The evidence nobody talks about. What if Bruce Lee didn't die from the thing that killed him? On July 20th, 1973, the world's most famous martial artist took a painkiller, lay down to rest, and never woke up. He was only 32 years old. But here's the disturbing part. Just 71 days earlier, Bruce Lee had already collapsed under mysterious circumstances. He had suffered a severe medical emergency. His brain had swollen. He was rushed to the hospital. Doctors saved his life. And somehow, Bruce Lee walked back out. He returned to filming. He returned to training. He returned to the life that had made him a global icon. But less than 3 months later, his brain would swell again. And this time, there would be no recovery. So here's the question. How does a man survive unexplained brain swelling once, only to die from almost the same thing weeks later? Was the painkiller really responsible? Was something already going wrong inside Bruce Lee's body? And if the first medical emergency was a warning, why didn't anyone see it coming? For more than 50 years. People have argued over what really killed Bruce Lee. But the most important clue may have appeared 71 days before his death, when Bruce Lee almost died the first time. Bruce Lee's death has produced everything from medical theories to murder rumors and conspiracy stories. But beneath all of that is a much more interesting question. What do the actual medical facts tell us? We know Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973. We know an autopsy found severe cerebral edema. We know he had taken Equagesic shortly before losing consciousness. And we know something even more important. He had already experienced a remarkably similar medical emergency only weeks earlier. That earlier episode is the part of the story that can easily disappear behind the mystery surrounding his final night. So let's go back to the beginning, because the first collapse may be the most important clue of all. May 10th, 1973, Bruce Lee was working on the production of Enter the Dragon in Hong Kong. He was not lying in a hospital bed. He was not recovering from a major injury. He was working. Then, suddenly something went terribly wrong. Lee collapsed and was taken to Hong Kong Baptist Hospital. Doctors diagnosed cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. He was treated with mannitol, a medication used to reduce brain swelling, and eventually regained consciousness. The event was serious enough that Lee was later evaluated in the United States. Neurologists examined him at UCLA. According to later accounts, testing did not reveal a clear structural abnormality or a definitive explanation for why the episode had happened. That uncertainty matters, because Bruce Lee had survived something that at the time nobody could fully explain. And then he did something that seems almost unbelievable in retrospect. He went back to work. After recovering, Bruce Lee returned to his demanding schedule. He was still developing his films, still training, still pushing his body, and still living at a pace that would have exhausted most people. His career was accelerating. Enter the Dragon was approaching release. His international fame was about to reach another level. From the outside, it looked as though the medical emergency had passed. But medically, there was an unanswered question sitting in the background. Why had his brain swollen in the first place? The doctors had treated the immediate problem, but treating swelling is not necessarily the same as identifying its underlying cause. And this distinction becomes crucial when we reach July. Because Bruce Lee's final collapse was not completely different from the one before it. It was disturbingly similar. Section 3, the final day, July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee was working on Game of Death. He met producer Raymond Chow, and later, the two went to actress Betty Ting Pei's apartment to discuss the film. At some point during the evening, Lee complained that he was not feeling well. He developed a headache. Betty Ting Pei gave him an Equagesic tablet. The medication contained aspirin and meprobamate, a sedative. Lee had reportedly used the medication before. He then went to lie down. It was supposed to be a short rest. But when the time came to leave for dinner, Bruce could not be awakened. A doctor was called. Attempts were made to revive him. He was taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But Bruce Lee was pronounced dead. He was 32. There had been no dramatic fight, no obvious physical injury, no known accident. One moment, he was working. Hours later, he was gone. The autopsy provided one undeniable fact. Bruce Lee's brain was severely swollen. His brain reportedly weighed approximately 1,575 grams, compared with an expected weight around 1,400 grams. There were no obvious external injuries explaining the death. The swelling was the immediate medical problem. But identifying the immediate cause is not always the same as identifying the ultimate cause. Think of it like a fire. The fire is what destroys the building. But investigators still have to determine what started the fire. In Bruce Lee's case, the fire was cerebral edema. The question was, what started it? The official conclusion at the time was that Lee suffered a hypersensitivity reaction to Equagesic, causing the fatal brain swelling. The coroner's court ultimately recorded his death as death by misadventure. For decades, that became the standard explanation. But it left one uncomfortable problem. Bruce had already experienced brain swelling before. And that happened before the final dose of Equagesic. The medication became the center of the official explanation. Equagesic contained two active ingredients, aspirin and meprobamate. The theory was that Bruce experienced an unusual hypersensitivity reaction to one of those ingredients. That reaction somehow produced the cerebral edema that killed him. It was medically plausible enough to become the accepted explanation. But there was an obvious question. Bruce had reportedly taken Equagesic before, so why would it suddenly become fatal? The answer is that previous tolerance does not make a severe reaction impossible. A person can develop sensitivity to a substance even after previous exposure. But there is another problem. On July 20, Bruce complained of feeling unwell and developed a headache before taking the tablet. That means the medication was taken after symptoms had already appeared. This makes the timeline more complicated than the simple version. Bruce took a pill, then died. The headache came first. The pill came afterward. And that distinction has become central to later discussions about his death. For decades, people debated the official explanation. Then, in 2022, a group of kidney specialists published a paper proposing a different possibility. Their theory focused on something much more ordinary than murder or poison. Water, the researchers suggested that Bruce Lee may have developed severe hyponatremia, an abnormally low sodium concentration in the blood caused by the body's inability to eliminate enough water. In severe cases, excess water can cause cells to swell. And when that happens, in the brain, cerebral edema can follow. The researchers pointed to several reported factors in Lee's lifestyle and final period of life that they believed could have increased the risk. The theory was striking because it connected the symptom found at autopsy, brain swelling, to a completely different mechanism. The study did not reopen the original investigation. It did not prove that Bruce Lee died from hyponatremia. It proposed a possible explanation based on the historical evidence available. And there is another limitation. The original medical records from 1973 did not provide the kind of modern blood chemistry data that would allow us to simply look at a sodium level and settle the question. So we are left with an intriguing possibility, not a proven answer. And now we return to May 10. This is where the story becomes especially difficult. Bruce Lee had already suffered cerebral edema. He recovered. Then, more than 2 months later, he experienced another episode involving headache and eventually fatal brain swelling. 2 separate events, similar neurological symptoms, no definitive underlying cause established. And that raises a question that cannot be answered with certainty today. Was there an underlying vulnerability that existed before July 20? We simply do not know. It could have been related to medication. It could have involved metabolic factors. It could have involved heat, hydration, exertion, or another medical mechanism. Some later theories have focused on different possibilities, but none has conclusively replaced the historical finding. And this is where responsible history becomes more interesting than conspiracy. We don't have to pretend certainty where the evidence doesn't give us certainty. After more than 50 years, several facts remain remarkably clear. Bruce Lee died on July 20, 1973, at age 32. He had complained of a headache. He took Equagesic. He went to lie down. He became unconscious. He was taken to the hospital and could not be revived. His autopsy showed severe cerebral edema. The official conclusion attributed that swelling to hypersensitivity involving Equagesic. But the earlier May episode means there was already a history of unexplained cerebral edema before his death. And that is the part of the story that deserves attention. Not because it proves a hidden conspiracy. It doesn't. But because it shows that Bruce Lee's death was medically more complicated than the simplified version many people have heard. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe because we publish documentaries like this every week. So, what really killed Bruce Lee? The most honest answer is also the least satisfying. We know what ultimately happened to his brain. It swelled. We know what the official investigation believed triggered that swelling, a hypersensitivity reaction involving Equagesic. And we now have a later medical hypothesis suggesting that severe hyponatremia may have caused the cerebral edema. But there is no definitive modern test that can travel back to July 20, 1973, and tell us exactly what happened inside Bruce Lee's body. And perhaps the biggest clue is the one that came first. May 10. The unexplained collapse, the earlier cerebral edema, the recovery, and then, less than 3 months later, the fatal recurrence. That timeline doesn't prove a hidden cause, but it tells us something important. Bruce Lee's final night may not have been an isolated event. It may have been the final chapter of a medical problem that had already announced itself weeks earlier. And by the time anyone understood how serious it was already too late. Bruce Lee spent his life studying movement, discipline, and the limits of the human body. He trained harder than almost anyone around him. He transformed martial arts. He became a global icon. And yet, at just 32 years old, his own body presented a mystery that medicine could not fully solve. The official explanation remains part of the historical record. Later theories have challenged it. But no theory has erased the central fact: Bruce Lee died from severe swelling of the brain, and the exact reason that swelling occurred remains debated. Maybe the final pill played the decisive role. Maybe an underlying medical vulnerability had already begun. Maybe another mechanism was involved. What we can say with confidence is that the warning signs did not begin on July 20. They began earlier. And that may be the most important detail in the entire story. Because sometimes the biggest mystery isn't what happened at the end. It's the warning that came before it. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this documentary interesting, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who wants to understand the real story behind Bruce Lee's final days.